Howdy, howdy! So some of these words that we're going to go over, especially these right here that I'm highlighting, these at the top, you'll know them already. But I think that repetition is always good, and repetition never hurts. So we're just going to spend the few moments that's going to take to quickly go back over these words to keep them nice and fresh in your noggins. Because I know that repetition always helps me. So let's talk about the Torah. The Torah is first 5 books of the Bible, of the Old Testament specifically. It is the Hebrew law. Okay? Canon, if you think of the word measuring stick, it is a measure or a set list of biblical books that we believe to be scripture. And by me, or we rather, I'm not just referring to us in modern times, I'm saying we in terms of Jewish Christian culture. That the canonization process has occurred for thousands of years. So canon, currently the lists that are canonized, those books, are the 27 New Testament books that we currently read. That is our canon. Okay? So the New Testament is written in what language? It would have been written in Greek. Some of it would have been written in a common form of Greek called Koine Greek. So that's something cool to know. If you want to be a little bit more specific, some parts would have been written in common Greek called Koine Greek. Okay? So the 4 types of literature in the New Testament, let's just go over those really quickly. You have the Gospels, you have the Acts of the Apostles, you have the Epistles, which are letters to the churches, and then you have Revelation. Okay? So what are the Gospels? Books about Jesus' life. You have Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Revelation is just Revelation. There's just one book there. Acts of the Apostles is just Acts. Epistles is everything else, essentially. Epistles takes up the majority of the New Testament. Take up most of the New Testament. Some of the epistles are the oldest writings in the New Testament. Paul wrote many of the epistles, although not all. You have some that are written by people that we don't necessarily know who they're written by, or they may have been written by Peter, but Paul wrote the majority of them. Who are scribes? Scribes are people who make a living by reading, writing, and copying documents. Why? Because not everyone was literate or could read and write in this time period. Okay, so it's cool to have people like scribes who they do know how to read and write, and that's what they do for a living. So they're kind of like record keepers. Nag Hammadi is an Egyptian town. Oh, there we go. Egyptian town in which in 1945, I believe, very old biblical documents were found. Okay, not to be confused with the Dead Sea Scrolls that are found in Qumran by the Dead Sea in 1947. So don't confuse the two. They're quite different. So heresy. What does it mean to be a heretic? It means false teaching or going against accepted biblical religious teachings. Jesus was oftentimes called a heretic because he didn't conform to what the Jewish community thought was appropriate. So there's this idea that you're going against the grain. You're not believing or teaching what religious leaders think you should. So the criteria for canonization, that's a really interesting sort of phenomenon there. I may just make an entire video separately on that. So I will direct you all to a later video for that. But until then, keep in mind some things are important to consider. Authorship. Authorship is important. How well it fits with other scriptures. For example, does it seem to fit well with the Old Testament? Does it seem to mesh well with what we already accept to be scripture? If so, then hey, maybe you'll fit in. If not, then maybe it shouldn't be part of our canon. Dating of it, if it is older, then it may be more authentic. Content, does the content of it kind of mesh with what we think is appropriate for our scriptures, what we kind of know to be biblical knowledge? So you get these ideas here that these are the general criteria for canonization. Canonization is a huge process, one that has taken thousands of years. So if you can imagine, I can't necessarily fit in over 1,000 years, if not more than that, of knowledge about canonization in that process into a video for you all. So I would encourage you to read back over your book for that. In a future video, I may try to make just a few points about it, just to help you wrap your minds about it a little bit. Okay, so why have a New Testament canon? It creates a standard for Scripture that we can all agree upon. So it helps bring unity to the church. Okay, so that's one thing to consider. There are other reasons as well. That's just, one thing that that you can consider. From this, you can think about yourself, and you can think about some other reasons why it would be good to have a New Testament canon. What arguments might there be against having canon? It is telling people what to believe. Doesn't give people the freedom of interpreting the Bible as they feel like they should. So again, there are those two reasons against that as well. Again, there are many more. Those are just two to kind of get you all thinking about it. So let's talk about Hebrew canon. Hebrew canon, the books of the Old Testament, or Old Testament scripture. What is the Septuagint? Again, this LXX refers to the 70 writers who were thought to have translated this document. But the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. What is this idea of oral tradition? Oral tradition is really important because it refers to the fact that not everyone could read and write in this time period. So oral storytelling and history were really important because not everyone could read and write. So keep this in mind. A lot of what we read about in the Bible is secondhand knowledge. Is passed down from people who claim to have seen Christ in real life. So that's what this oral tradition is. It's this idea that you oftentimes have many people contributing to a narrative about Christ. You have stories being passed down over time. So very soon we are going to go into part 2 of this video. I hope you stay tuned for then.